Hi, I'm David Putman, founder of Planting the Gospel, where we help churches transition from a weekend-only culture to a disciple-making culture. I'm also lead navigator with Oksana. We're Clarity, Vision Clarity organization, where we would say that clarity isn't everything, but it changes everything. And that's certainly true when it comes to church planting. I want to share with you a tool today that we use. Our founder, Will Mancini, developed a number of years ago. Perhaps you've heard of it, called the Vision Frame. And so when it comes to church planting and specifically vision, there's 5 questions that every church planter has to answer if you're going to have clarity. Now, clarity is really, really important, because if you don't have clarity, you can find yourself jumping from one thing to the other. And I can't tell you, in my years of being involved in planting and coaching planters, how many churches I've seen fail just because the planter never really locked in on the vision, on clarity, and it just did continue to jump around. So the 5 questions are what we call the 5 questions of irreducible leadership. They are: what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we doing it? When are we successful? And where God is ultimately taking us. So whenever we develop the vision frame, this master tool that we use for visioning, we answer those 5 questions. And I'm going to walk you around that in just a moment. And so this becomes a tool not only for developing vision clarity, but this is really crucial for you guys. It also is a tool for how you lead with vision. And what I find is so many people don't know how to lead with vision, how to create a vision culture. Another way that I like to think about the vision frame is it's also a disciple-making frame. You see, because any vision that we have as church planters, or even the church, should be wrapped around the Great Commission. So this is where we really spell out our great permission with the Great Commission. It's what God is churning and stirring in your heart. It's the very reason that you're planting a church. So let's walk around this frame real quick. Let me show you how it works. You see, the first question, irreducible question of leadership, is what are we doing? And so I'll put what right over on the right-hand side of the frame. And so we're answering the question, what are we doing? We know this as mission. Or another way of saying it, it is our missional mandate. We also call it question 0. And the reason we call it question 0 is simply because it's the question that has to be answered before any other question. And so we always begin in our organizational clarity and with our vision work, our disciple-making work, with that so important question of, hey, what are we doing? What is our mission? What is the one thing we do? What is the one thing that never changes in our organization? And so it's mission. The second irreducible question is the question, so we got what are we doing? Why do we do it? And when we talk about why, if this is mission, the why is the why behind the what. Question 0, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And we call this our values, or another way of looking at it, we call it our missional motives. And so that's question number 2. So we begin always with what, then we go to why. And then a third question that we want to address, our 5 irreducible questions, is how are we doing it? What is how are we doing it? How we're doing it is strategy. So we could say is strategy. Another way of looking at this question is our missional map. And so that's the strategy question. So we've got to answer these 3 questions. Then our 4th question is one of my favorite, and it's the question when. In other words, hey, when are we successful? If this is what we're doing, if this is why we're doing it, if this is how we're doing it, then when are we successful? Another way of asking that question is, hey, what does a disciple look like in our context? And so you see, the focus is not just on a matrix that includes how many people show up on Sunday morning or how many people do you have in small group, but it gets down to, hey, what kind of disciples are you making? Because if our what is always a disciple-making mission, then our when is always related. We're successful when we're making a very specific kind of disciple, and so we call this our measures, or we could say our missional marks. And that leads us to the last question, and the last question is when. Oh, I'm sorry. Is where. In other words, where is God taking us? So hear me once again. The 5 questions of irreducible leadership that make up our vision frame is, what are we doing? That's mission. Why are we doing it? Values. How are we doing it? Our strategy. When are we successful? Our measures. And where is God taking us? And we call this vision proper. And so where is God taking us? And so when we think about vision, oftentimes we only think of this where question. But in reality, you've heard people say before, or heard someone say, if not, you hear me saying, vision is everything. This is what we mean by vision being everything. Now let me show you one more thing before I wrap up. How to use this frame. Why this is such a powerful tool. Now, this is my favorite part of it. So let's imagine for a moment that you plant your church and you begin to reach your community, and so Joe Grow shows up at your church. Joe Grow hears the gospel. He responds to it. God opens his heart, and he begins to grow in his faith. And so let's look at this vision frame through the lens of Joe Grow, the people you are planting the church for. You see, so the first thing that the mission does is it describes what Joe does. And so if you think about mission, maybe your mission is something like connecting the disconnected to a Christ-centered life or Christ-filled life. So what does Joe do in that statement? Joe connects the disconnected. You get that? Hey, and by the way, here's what I love about it. Joe will do that because Joe knows a lot of disconnected people because he's just coming in. So we look at Joe. If this is what Joe does, he connects disconnected people because that's perhaps our mission. Then we come over to the why, and the why represents what Joe knows. In other words, when Joe walks in off the street into your church, this is what he knows. Why does he know it? Because it's your values, it's your culture. He knows it long before he reads it, long before he attends a newcomer or connection event. He knows that there's certain things that are radically important to you because they're everywhere. They're unstated, but you don't have to state them because they're your values. They always come to the top. So this is what Joe knows. And then we look at the strategy, the how, the strategy, and this is where Joe goes. You see, when Joe comes in, he doesn't know where to go. And so we need to have a missional map, is the word we talked about a while ago. A missional map so that Joe will know what his next step is. I was working with a church in a city. They asked me to come in and evaluate their strategies, and they had 50 strategy programs or program strategies. I'm not sure what they were. 50 things going on. And so we had all 50 representatives in the room, and I introduced them to Joe, and I said, where does Joe go? And they all pointed in what direction? Their direction. 50 different directions. And I said, no, Joe goes out the door because there's not a clear step for Joe. And so this is why it's so important. I spoke with a church just on the phone on a coaching call just not too long ago in today, and they were describing their very effective church, their simple strategy. And it was so clear where Joe went. And so that's what we're trying to get at here. So that's where Joe goes. Again, this is one of my favorite right up here. It's the when question. And this is, what does Joe become? You see, this is what Joe does. This is what Joe knows. This is where Joe goes. This is what Joe becomes. And then ultimately, where is God taking us is where Joe goes. And so you see, vision, or the vision frame, is not just about clarity, but it's about being able to live out of that clarity. And so as you get ready, matter of fact, I would encourage each one of you church planters that what you want to do is you want to make sure you do the hard work of clarity up front. Now let me give you a couple tips while I'm here. One is, don't do it alone. Build a vision team among your core group and go through a collaborative process and do a deep dive until you get real spiritual breakthrough. Why? Because we believe that vision doesn't spread on paper, but it spreads through people. It's got to get in the heart, in the person. And so make sure, don't make a common mistake that many church planners make and just go draw up a vision frame and say, here it is. But do the deep processing work required to experience true breakthrough. And then, hey, clarity isn't everything, but what? Changes everything. Everything you do will speed up, and you'll be more effective when you do this.